to more fully participate in American society. These are the two dual missions, basically the dual missions that we focus on. In fact, on an annual basis, we'll have conferences that focus in these two areas. And as a matter of fact, next year, on April 24th, we'll have our annual conference again in San Francisco. On October 31st of this year, we'll have a conference in Beijing. We will continue to rotate these annual conferences in major cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., New York, Beijing, Hong Kong, Shanghai, etc. But on a regional basis, we thought that it would be important also for us to have more frequent dialogue to cover these two areas. So that's why we launched this speaker forum for the first time, and appropriately so, we wanted to do it in the city of San Francisco. And I am personally very excited. In fact, if you look at Committee of 100, the second part of the dual mission is to help Chinese Americans to more fully participate and engage in American society. Oftentimes, I talk to various leaders within our community, and I said, what do Asian Americans aspire to? And we've seen many of Asian Americans had actually done well in business. Some of them lead, major technology companies. Some of them are big-time real estate developers. We have great medical doctors, professors, etc., etc. We like to do better in the athletic field, like have a 5 more Jeremy Lin. But maybe that would take a little bit more time. But one of the most important things that people always talked about within the Asian American community is that we wish we had more representation in the political world in the United States. And to me, is very aspiring for me today to witness at this forum that we have 3 of the most important political leaders that represent Asian Americans. For one, later on I'm going to introduce our beloved member, Chiang, State Controller of California, and in fact, clearly now is one of the leading, highest ranking Asian American political leaders in the government sector. Also, today we're so fortunate to have a mayor of San Francisco, the first Asian American mayor in the city of San Francisco, a major city, international city like San Francisco. And right next to our mayor Edwin is Mayor Quan, the first Asian American that lead the city of Oakland. But not only just Asian American, also the first female mayor in the city of Oakland. So this is very exciting to see that in this room that we have these 3 leaders that can give us a lot of inspiration for the next generation that, well, if you think that it's difficult being Asian Americans to move up the rank, yes, we all recognize there are a lot of challenges, but look at these 3 role models. And someday, we hope that there'll be a lot more in many other different cities, and then also in Washington, D.C. So, but I'm not going to get into too much of this discussion about aspiration and so forth, because I know that today we have a very important topic to cover. And as a matter of fact, thanks to our fearless leader, Bob Lee, who was former chair of Committee 100, and he will be moderating a very interesting and current topic that I'm sure later on you will enjoy. I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank our vice chair who is in charge of this region, Jay Su. And in fact, the reason that we have the Speakers Forum first to be taking place in the city of San Francisco because of Jay Su's leadership. And I think that you will see more and more activities coming from Committee 100 in this area, because I'm counting on Jay Su to continue to come up with more and more new and exciting programs. So with that, I also wanted to thank 10 of the supporting organizations who are helping us today. And let me just read the names. 1990 Institute, Association of Asian American Investment Managers, Asian Pacific Islanders for Professional and Community Advancement, Northern California, China SF, China Silicon Valley, the Office of Oakland Mayor Quan, the Office of San Francisco Mayor Edwin, Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society, Teach for China, and last but not least, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I also want to quickly thank some of our other speakers here, and actually to the furthest left, Myron, brilliant. Every time I go to an event that the major leaders from China would go to, Myron's always there. And he's actively engaging in U.S.-China relationship. And I know he's always busy, travel all over the country and all over the world, but I'm so glad that he come all the way out to San Francisco to participate in this important forum for Committee 100. Right next to him, Jeff Wadsworth, co-chair of Asia Society here in this town, but obviously, clearly one of the top experts of U.S.-China relationship. Jack and I would collect contemporary Chinese artwork together, but he knows that a lot more than I do, so I always have to look him up and say, is that a good buy? And next to Jack, Marguerite, Hancock, again, an expert, in the U.S.-China business. And so I'm very excited to see such a great panel put together by our very able hand, Angie Tang, who basically run the day-to-day program for Committee 100. So I look forward to be entertained of this exciting program. I thank Bob for being the moderator. So at this point, I want to invite my very good friend, again, a great member of C100, our state controller, John Chiang, to come up and say a few words to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dominic. I'm absolutely delighted to join all of you. Dominic, thank you for your extraordinary professional and civic leadership and your incredible nonprofit contributions to the California community. I am especially excited to join all of you on this extraordinary occasion. We know that when you gather, there is always a context to both time and place, and both of them were referenced in the comments by both Angie and Dominic. Today is September 11th. I think it reminds all of us how indeed fortunate we are to be Americans, the opportunities that are afforded to us each and every single day. But more importantly, the responsibilities and duties we have to each other and this country. And then place, as Dominic so appropriately pointed out. One of our former members, Irish Chiang, wrote a book about the history of the Chinese American. And when you think about the context of where we are today, and I apologize, Ed, I'm going to say some of the comments that I shared Friday, because I am so proud. We talked about the extraordinary discrimination and high hurdles that Chinese Americans had to surpass to make contributions just as any other American. And so when the Chinese came to this country near the founding, or slightly before the founding of this great state, they were discriminated against, and they had their migration patterns. And so at one point, Chinese were 90% of the farmers of California. And then many of them moved here, and you had tremendous hurdles that they also had to overcome in this city. And to see time pass, and to see our societies and our people grow, it is incredibly inspiring to see Edwin as the mayor of San Francisco and Quan as the mayor of Oakland. They are tremendous contributors. They are anchor tenants to the progress, not only for Chinese Americans, but for all of us. So it's great to be here in this context. Now, that is a foundation for where we need to go forward. As the state's chief fiscal officer, we have extraordinary challenges. We all love this state, but we are quickly reminded of the fact that just a few years ago, California almost went off the fiscal cliff. In the international conversations, California was being compared to Greece. We were a hair's width from defaulting on the state's debt. Now, the voters of California made a very powerful decision. They gave Californians a 7-year window to fix our financial difficulties. Now, that will not occur unless all of us take advantage of the spirit of September 11th and we come together for our greater purpose. We have to come together socially, politically, economically, for the greater good. Now, China is a large part of that. California today is, the United States today is slightly more than 20% of the world's GDP. In my lifetime, we were once 1/3 of the world's GDP. And when you think about what needs to transpire, we need incredible economic growth and the opportunity to build and forge new partnerships that have been unseen and unheard of in the past. Because when we look at the historical context, either you have had a rise in the East or the rise in the West. And we know that this century, the 21st century, simply has to be different. You both must rise. And so whether you're in the international realm, such as Dominic, whether you're in finance, or whether you're in trade, or technology, or real estate, we know that we need to overcome these hurdles to build the partnerships that will make up for the cavities that exist today in California's economy, especially in manufacturing and construction. And secondly, the other area, and frankly, if you go back to your basic Economics 101 class, the most essential element of economic growth, which is human capital. And so by bringing the best together to compile the best ideas, we will indeed have what we all dream of. Last point on this. All of us in Committee of 100's leading an effort need to close the gap between the private sector and the public sector. Together, we can fashion a more expeditious response to what is required. And so our best days are ahead. It's a celebration of everything that's good before us. And so let's pay tribute to those who lost their lives on September 11th as we gather and move California and the United States forward. It is now my great pleasure to introduce, as Dominic provided earlier, our former chairperson, leader in so many different fields that are of critical importance, telecommunications, and one area now that has impact globally, healthcare, because many of us understand baby boom generations that are retiring. We are fortunate enough to know that he is the moderator of this panel, the terrific Bob Lee.
Thank you, John. Thank you. As we embark on this journey with the star-studded panel here, it's a good time to look back a little bit before we look forward. I couldn't help but think as I was coming into the city today that when my father came to this country as a 10-year-old in 1916, he and the people that he preceded and followed him for a long time, coming from Toisan, called this place Gimsan, right? Golden Mountain. And of course this was the place of great hope. It was the place of great opportunity where you just had to close your eyes and dig your shovel in and gold would come out. Of course, once he got here, there was a harsh reality. I remember one story he told me about as a kid, as a 10-year-old kid. They would, he and his friends would periodically try to adventure across Columbus Avenue, run out of Chinatown, only to be chased back in by the kids in Little Italy and all around, chased back in to the confines of Chinatown. Fast forward 100 years, and Dad, look what we got now. We've got a mayor in San Francisco. His last name is Lee, and he's from Toisan. How wonderful is this, right? Also, fast forward that 100 years, and just think about what people are thinking about the Chinese market. Is that the Gimsan going forward? Is that the Golden Mountain going forward? It might be when Apple develops an iPhone targeted at that market. So many other major corporations in the United States are targeting the China market. It may be the Gimsan going forward. With that in mind, I think we can all just make an assumption that the people that we attracted here for this speakers forum are in favor of more and higher quality trade between the United States and China. So let's just take that as a given. But why? It's certainly good for our mutual economies on both sides of the Pacific. It's certainly good for business, and many of you represent those perspectives. It's good for politics as well. And I recall that Thomas Friedman's first book, The World is Flat, we talked about how it's going to be the business ties that are going to link and bridge across the political differences between countries. He cited as an example Taiwan and mainland China. That over time, because of the business interests and then the personal interests and intermarriages, the Straits of Taiwan are going to become no longer an obstacle between the two entities. So it's good for politics. And if it's good for politics, I think it's also good for Chinese Americans, and I see a lot of Chinese Americans here in the audience. The Committee of 100 has done numerous studies that have shown a positive correlation between the way Americans view U.S.-China relations and the way they view Chinese Americans. So it's our hope as an organization representing Chinese American interests that we see the politics of U.S. and China improve over time. So to dig into this whole subject, we hope to uncover some of the obstacles to doing more and higher quality relationships between the U.S. and China in terms of trade, and learn some insights as to how do we enhance that. So with that in mind, we have this blue ribbon family. From the government sector, we have Mayor Lee and Mayor Quan. From the business perspective, Jack Wadsworth and Myron Brilliant. And from the academic standpoint, Marguerite, Gong, Hancock. I won't go into their full bios that are in your programs, but I want to kick it off by introducing my younger and better looking brother, the mayor of San Francisco, the 42nd mayor of this wonderful city, Ed Lee.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. First of all, let me thank C100. Dominic Ng, thank you very much for providing me with the invitation to be here. Of course, the Executive Director, Angie Tang, thank you again for inviting me as well. I also would like to thank John Chiang. I watched his career, and well before I became mayor, I was looking at how devastating the state economy was, as he talked about. And I think there was a period of time where I'm sure John went his head saying, what do I have to do to help turn the state around? And there was a couple of months there, you all recall, where he showed some guts, showed some backbone. And to have an Asian American at the highest level in the state do that also suggested something that is analogous to what Jeremy Lin did in sports. There's those moments where you just face up a situation and you have a strong back and you just take the ball to him. And that's what John did when he said, no, I ain't gonna get checks out because our state is imbalanced. And that took a lot of guts. That's the kind of inspiration that I like to see, because that's what's driven me to take on some of the tough decisions that I have to make as the mayor of the city. And Jean's gonna say the same thing. I mean, for her and I, running these cities, they're tough cities to run, tough to manage, a lot of diverse viewpoints. And we gotta have a backbone to do it. And these are those opportunities where Asians who have been viewed in the past as perhaps a little bit too collaborative, too nice, we do have our backbones. And when it comes to our communities, when it comes to where we live, quality of life, we're going to stand up for our communities. And so I'm glad that John is here to do that. I also want to say thank you to Jay Shu, our Bay Area Vice President here at C100. And you've been doing a great job also as a director of our Asian Art Museum. I'm glad I'm working with you as well. I know that C100 has been around for some 20 years. I have to profess that I didn't know what C100 was about 6 or 7 years ago, right around the time that I was trying to figure out where did Bob Lee go. He was in my life when I was at the Asian Law Caucus and turning out some things, and then he disappeared after he left Pacific Bell. Was jumping around, and then I heard he was the president of C100 at the time, and I said, well, what's C100? And he says, well, it's a business community. Oh, really? I thought it was for those Chinese that were hitting around 100 years old. That was the analogy. Anyway, I do know, of course, that C100 has been an important voice between the United States and China and fostering those exchanges. In fact, just this summer, I was at a very important event. It happened to be with George Shultz, former Secretary of State, with Henry Kissinger, with a number of people at Stanford. And they said at that meeting, the relationship between the United States and China is today one of the most important relationships in the whole world. And for these historic leaders to say that today to us, I recognize that the things that I do in this city have international impact and international importance. That is why I've worked really hard to make sure not only what I do is understood domestically, but that I understand its link, whether it's to Oakland or the Silicon Valley and to the whole peninsula, or whether whatever we do is announced and explained to the people in Shanghai, in Beijing, or in other parts of the eastern countries. I'm honored to be the first Asian mayor of San Francisco, and I understand and appreciate this extraordinary part of our history. I know also that our city is a hub for entrepreneurialism. It's international, it's an instant community for collaboration, for sharing, and certainly for innovation. You know, this work and the success that you hear about the city of San Francisco these days, whether it's the cranes that you see, or the buildings that are going up, or the incredible tech infusion, it's not all by luck. We do work hard to create those conditions for that to exist. And I know part of my mission, similar to others in similar positions in government, is to create the conditions in which there is investor confidence in our city. And that translates into what we're doing today to invite investment from China into San Francisco. You've got to create those conditions where no matter how much of our debt they have, they're still going to evaluate, are you a good investment in San Francisco? Whether it's housing and land use, or whether it's part of a luxury condo or building, or other parts of the city that we're trying to invite them with the EB5 presentations that are existing in the private sector as well. We've got to be investor confident in our city. Well, what am I working on to make sure we're investor confident? Our unemployment rate when I first started in 2011 was 9.5%. So for the last 2 years, I've been working hard for jobs. And today, I'm proud to announce that our unemployment rate is 5.9%, third lowest in the state of California. That takes a lot of work, a lot of collaboration. We're, in fact, one of the fastest growing big counties in all of the United States. Every sector of our city's economy is outpacing the rest of the city's growth rate. And leading the way is, of course, our service industry with strong tourism, but our professional and business services, our construction, of course, our local manufacturing. Well, a new statistic is something that we haven't been able to announce in years in the past, is that just in the past year, between 2011 and 2012, we leased 23.6 million square feet of office space. And trying to give you a wraparound on that, that's the equivalent to 44 Transamerica pyramids. So it's real, it's happening, and of course, with 1,892 technology companies that employ over 45,000 people, we do proudly label ourselves as an innovation center for the United States. We're doing all the other things that we should be doing. We're inviting great events that come. You see America's Cup now. Later in the fall, we'll have the Charles Schwab Golf Tournament. We have the U.S. Conference of Mayors in 2015 that will be coming here. And in 2016, very shortly, we'll see the Super Bowl hosted by San Francisco. That'll be a great accomplishment for all of us. We're focused on an economy that's not just local, but global also, because we understand that we are part of a Bay Area gateway to the Pacific. In 2008, we started China SF. It's the first public-private partnership to focus on attracting and retaining companies and investments from China to San Francisco to create more jobs for our companies and for our residents. It's a partnership between the city and the San Francisco Center for Economic Development that focuses on industries like tech, bio and life sciences, clean and green, tech, finance, construction, and of course, food. And we're bringing that focus not only to our world-class city, but we bring events both in China and here. We have offices established in Shanghai and Beijing, and we'll be very shortly opening an office in Guangzhou to support and educate the companies that would like to establish their presence here, whether they're in the finance or in bio-life sciences, and we're creating those conditions to do that. This month, we'll have a California week in Shanghai to showcase our San Francisco companies and products to Shanghai and to the rest of the world. This model of the China SF is so popular that we're recreating the same thing with Latin America, because we know that being an international city will not only help our city, it'll certainly help the state of California. And I know that John is going to try to help resurrect our international status because that's what is needed for the whole state of California. Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Quan, I'm so proud of the glass ceilings that you've broken in terms of your career thus far. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the first woman, the first Asian American mayor of Oakland, and the first American woman mayor of a major U.S. city, Mayor Quan.
Thank you. People often ask me, is it tougher to be a woman mayor or Asian American? The combination can sometimes be tough. But there are only 9 women who lead any of the top 100 cities in America. So being a woman, I think sometimes, the question of whether we're tough enough, nobody asks why if they're tough enough to be mayor. But I was checking out with the other 8 women mayors, and it always comes up at one time. And then I think you have this image, unfortunately still this image, because anybody who really knows Asian women know we're really tough. Anybody who has a Chinese mother knows that Chinese women are pretty tough. Right. So you can tell how culturally versed people are as to whether or not they believe Asian women are not tough enough. My history, I think, with China goes back to being, my husband and I were founders of the Asian American Studies at Berkeley, closed down the campus for a couple of weeks, and were able to get on the Asian American Studies program. And in our programs, we believe that the students should be involved in the community, so all of our courses were based around subject matter. So the Asian Law Caucus actually came out of our Asians in the Law class at UC Berkeley, and the Asian Health Clinic in Oakland, and the Health Center 4 came out of our Chinese Americans and healthcare classes. And the students created these community projects that later became nonprofits and became part of the government. And so in my entire life, I've had the ability to make institutional change. And so when we left Berkeley, I left my husband going to medical school. We didn't have a lot of time, and I took all the money they gave us for getting married, and I went to Hong Kong to study Cantonese. And we were there when Nixon, a couple of girlfriends and me were there when Nixon went through. And we went to the China Travel Service, and we said, okay, we want to go to China too. And they said, you know, if you do this, the FBI will investigate. We thought they were exaggerating, but indeed, after I came home, the FBI did visit my in-laws and asked what I was doing in China. And my father-in-law, who was not a liberal person, who had been in the US Navy, had said, excuse me, didn't the president just go to China? It's sort of like, so are you investigating him too? So the uneasy history and relationship of Chinese Americans sometimes to China, and being divided over what had happened in '49, and then realizing that, quite frankly, nobody knew the difference between Taiwan and China. The rest of the world were Chinese Americans, and that we needed to find our own place in history. So Edwin and I had this little joke at the bridge, right? Because I had none of the media covered, but I brought a golden spike. Because one of the most amazing pictures I found when we were doing our Asian American Studies class was the picture of the Golden Spike at Utah. And if you looked at that picture, the bankers were in the middle, no insult to the bankers, but the bankers were in the middle, Crocker, et cetera, right? Then there were some townspeople, and then there were all the Irish workers, and then right on the edges of the picture, way in the back, up the hill, you could see the Chinese workers. And we said, this is going to be interesting, because the two Chinese-American mayors are going to be at the center of this picture. And it really sort of shows. And so I actually ran this picture in my newsletter, who cut the chain on the bridge last time, and who cut the chain this time. And this time it was like women and minorities, and before it was all white guys in the same gray suit. So symbolism is important, and I think it's also important in the issues of trade. I think the fact that Ed and I are pretty well known in China has probably for both of our cities brought investors and a little bit of confidence. Whatever is true or not true is that probably both Ed and I are pretty fiscally conservative. And so I inherited not as quite a wealthy city as Ed, we were $40 million in debt. And I had to we've cut about 20% of our workers over the last 6 years in the recession. And now we're adding back, and we're adding back police first, we're adding back other services. But Oakland is the part of the Bay Area leading the country out of the recession. We are above the national average, although we're the poorest city in the Bay Area. We are still above the national average. And I can rival him. I started at 13% unemployment, I'm now at 8%. So the unemployment in Oakland is going down. In the last year, we opened 61 new restaurants, and there have been some interesting articles on housing in the Bay Area. So one of the reasons that Oakland is so diverse is that by policy, we've kept workforce housing. And so I used to tease Ed when I first got to be mayor. I said, you know, when we have lunch over here, I get better service than you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, all these waiters live in Oakland, right? At some of the hotels. And so I tell these jokes because we're really a region, and a lot of Oaklanders work in the city. A lot of his workers live in Oakland. When I'm trying to sell the Port of Oakland, and we're trying to make sure that the railroad tracks in the Central Valley don't get torn up because they bring the agricultural products to the Port of Oakland, and Oakland is the largest exporter of agricultural products in the United States to China. I think it was $6 billion last year. Now, I'll check the notes in my staff for that. We recently, as you know, just signed a deal with Zarzian, one of the major developers in China, and the largest individual investment in the United States, $1.5 billion investment in housing. And I have to tell you that now we're welcoming more and more investors, and that was built on top of already a pretty steady investment by EB5 investors in major buildings along. I was teasing the Shorenstein company. I said, these Chinese investors are buying more office buildings than you are in Oakland. And what is critical, and again, in due deference to the bankers, many of the banks are sitting on a lot of capital. And the housing market in the Bay Area is very, very hot. And at one point last year, it was the fastest turnaround in the country in Oakland, that houses were staying on the market less than 14 days. And nobody was lending for new housing. We've permitted 2,000 housing units from before the recession, and nobody was lending until the Chinese invested. And Mike Giavetti, who owns Signature Property, told me, nobody would lend to me. I was going to the East Coast, I was going to Chicago. The Chinese invested. Suddenly all those guys are calling us because they figured, well, maybe we should start investing. And so the two things I want to say in trends, I am the chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors International Committee, is that I believe that the Chinese have jump-started certain investments in many parts of the country. When Ed and I went to the White House, I brought him as my date. When we came back, there were a lot of mayors sitting in the bar at the Capitol Hill, where they all hang out. And several of them told me that the Chinese had bought buildings in the Rust Belt, manufacturing, and that they had brought back manufacturing, and they brought back steel and other kinds of companies because they had the foresight to invest in that. And so I don't think the Chinese are underrated in that. And last year during the presidential election, people the mayors I know were not afraid of Chinese investors. They were just like, how can I get more? Can you tell me how I can get more Chinese investors? Because during the recession, even today, people willing to capitalize in the tougher industries and taking a risk in cities. Oakland, has this reputation it doesn't deserve. And they are cold-blooded financial evaluators. They looked at the risk, they look at what they profits, and I have to tell you, the largest sales going on now are Chinese, Taiwanese, Chinese from Thailand, and Chinese from China, because they see good deals and they're looking for the long-term profits. So I think that Ed and I play an important role to bridge the culture, both with our American mayor counterparts, but also with our counterparts in China. Both of us have been participating in the U.S.-China Mayor Exchange. I recently spoke to their equivalent of the U.S. Conference of Mayors on green cities. And that's a major challenge for the Chinese. If their children can't breathe, and working with the more innovative mayors and having exchanges on how we build a global situation with gas, with our green gases issues across the world, and global warming is critical, and I think we also play a role in that. So those are my two thoughts, that the Chinese are making critical investments where nobody else is investing, and we would be stupid not to only encourage them, but to thank them for that. And at the same time, that there's huge markets where California in particular and China will rise together. We're so interrelated in terms of our industries, in terms of our trade. When they do better, we'll do better too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. One of the great attractions to this region of the country for capital, human capital, and dollars is the academic resources that we have. And our next speaker is Marguerite Gong Hancock. She's the Associate Director of SPRIE, which is an international research and education program at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Marguerite, welcome.
Thank you. Your remarks reminded me of my own story, and I hope you don't mind me just starting with a personal reflection of gratitude. In a small village outside of Guangzhou, there were two brothers who shared a dream for their village. One was to bring education to the village, and the other to bring electricity. These seemed impossible dreams in the late 1800s, and yet they made a pact to do that. Nobody had ever left the village to have a college education, and yet a generation later, one brother's son did go to Nanjing University and establish the first school in that part of China, one in fact that President Bush visited as a model school. The other brother came to Gold Mountain and was like many thousands of others, started a laundry, became an entrepreneur, opened a grocery store, and of his family of 6, one child was lucky enough to be admitted to a university. That son was Walter Albert Gong, my father, class of 1950 at Stanford, electrical engineering. This is a remarkable place that we live, that in just a few generations we can see opportunities come. They have been hard fought and hard won, yet we see the fruits. So I want to pay tribute not only to my own family of pioneers, but these people that I'm sitting with. Thank you. If we fast forward to thinking about the flows of people, we can see that Silicon Valley itself was developed with immigrant entrepreneurs. The old story, of course, was that the secret to Silicon Valley was ICs, meaning, of course, integrated circuits, but also Indians and Chinese. A full 40%, 30% of startups in the Valley have immigrant entrepreneurs as founders. And now in Silicon Valley, 40% of the people who live there speak another language besides English at home. Truly, we live in a globalized society, and this is essential to the strength of economic strength of this place, because certainly the Bay Area is vibrant, its ties to talent, its ties to the growth, most dynamic markets, its ties to places of geopolitical strength come not only at institutional levels, which are very important at the city and policy levels, but also with individuals. So I'd like to just use that metaphor of individuals and the kinds of entrepreneurial and innovative decisions that they make as the framing for my few remarks. In 1994, two individuals, Les Cottrell, a brilliant up-and-coming scientist at Stanford Linear Accelerator, and Ru Sheng, a brilliant scientist at the Institute for High Energy Physics, decided that it was time that these scientists bridge, in a sense, the Pacific and have their research institutes begin to talk more frequently. There was this new tool at the time, the internet, and those two scientists became instrumental in creating the first physical internet connection to China. As we look ahead to the 20th anniversary next year, we can see the power of the internet, started by first the scientific universities, and how that has now spread. We can see that the initial flow of dynamism and innovation going from Silicon Valley to China, with new companies being started, with business models being borrowed, technology being copied, has certainly now changed as we see Tencent and Baidu in the top 10 companies that have been born and grown in China now in the top 10 internet companies worldwide. We see China has eclipsed in terms of internet users the United States, more mobile users now, and leading in terms of not only the number, but the types of users, moving from last quarter for the first time, more users on the internet on mobile devices than on PCs. So as we see this locus of technology adoption, technology change, and I would argue important kinds of innovation, move from Silicon Valley to China and back again, it's critical for us to think, as the mayor has said, about this is not an either-or kind of equation, but since we are in this networked economy, just as Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, which I might spell these days as B-E-I, Bay Area, because we have so many ties with Beijing and beyond, these hubs are drive their strength not only what's happening within the region, but to the extent that each of these economies, each of the companies, each of the leaders can link and leverage to the hubs worldwide. That includes China, includes now London and Berlin and others. In our research at SPRIE, particularly in the China 2.0 program that I lead, we've done an interesting study of all of venture capital investment since 1984 to the present, over 3,000 rounds of investment. And we've been able to trace out the maps, who invested in whom, down to the level of not only individual companies, but the individual people that made the decision. And it's remarkable to see the evolution of these networks, industry by industry. The consumer electronics industry looks very, very different than the internet and so forth, and also by region. Beijing is developing in a very different way than Shanghai or Shenzhen and so forth. But the key story is that regardless of what industry you're in, what city you're developing, that the extent that you're able to connect in these networks and become a node that's connected to others, that is what drives the performance in terms of the firms and their ability to have a higher value when they went to market or a merger acquisition value. So this metaphor of networks, whether it's individuals who are coming to Stanford, Chinese students have for the last 10 years had the highest number of foreign students at Stanford. We have almost 1,000 students. And these students are not only bringing their own perspectives, which are important to having a global student body, but then they are returning to areas of work. At the business school, we've recently done a study that shows that in the internet industry, we have a remarkable number representation Joe Chen of Renren, the Facebook of China, Victor Ku of Youku, of the YouTube of China, James Leong, the founder of C-Trip, the Travelocity of China, even Lu Dong, the founder of La Mio, the Victoria's Secret of China. We have actually counted over 40 founder entrepreneurs that have come from China to Stanford and returned back. So we can see the power of education in being able to train the next generation of leaders. And by the way, the internet is not only a force for economic growth and technology change, but is also increasingly for China, as here in the United States. It's been a tool for better quality of life and social change. And we can see, for example, how platforms like Weibo have been used to have the first self-organized relief for people caught in torrential rains in a storm, where they mobilized to say, we can help each other through this sort of self-organized relief in a time of natural disaster. And as in other places in the world, we've seen the ability to share information. And in Beijing, all of those who are spending time there are grateful for the Weibo users who help precipitate a new attention for air quality there. So as we think about, I would like to just leave this metaphor that as we look at people who are now global citizens, who are making connections one-to-one as investors, as entrepreneurs, as educators, as co-students, that we think of this network, that we, through the ability to connect, to link and leverage, this is how we can build our mutual benefit through innovation and entrepreneurship. And with that, as at least Mayor Lee said, this relationship of the United States and China, if not the most important, is certainly becoming central, because no international challenge these days, whether it's food security, climate change, reforming financial institutions, cannot go forward without cooperation between the United States and China. It's a privilege to be with you among those individuals who are making decisions day by day to build those bridges. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Marguerite. I know our next speaker doesn't look like Marlon Brando. He's much better looking. But I think of him as one of the godfathers of trade between the United States and China. Have you ever had an introduction like this, Chad? I won't take it any further, but I would like to introduce to you a good friend, former chair of Morgan Stanley Asia, co-chair of the Asia Society here in the Bay Area, and a person who still continues to influence policies between the United States and China trade. Okay?
Thank you very much. If you told me that was going to be the introduction, but more importantly, if you told me I would follow two tough Chinese women, I think I probably would not have accepted the invitation. Marguerite's comment reminds me of the importance of personal journey. And I hadn't planned to say this, but it is curious. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky called Fort Thomas, Kentucky, which is the Midwestern part of the United States, south of Cincinnati, Ohio. And if anybody had told me that I would be an investor in China, an advocate for China, an enthusiast for Chinese contemporary art when I was growing up in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, I would have said, you're crazy. And in fact, my father, our family had a long, long tradition of private manufacturing, which is the typical business model in the Midwestern part of the United States. And when I decided to go to Wall Street from the University of Chicago Business School, he said, my son, you have sold out. You have become a parasite. You will now depend on the Midwest. You'll depend on manufacturing. But more importantly, he said, New York and California, so I think our country would be better off if both of those states were cut adrift. And of course, you can imagine he was a conservative Republican. So, anyway, what I have to say is fairly simple. say it quickly. The future of the U.S.-China relationship has always been on my mind. It's been increasingly on my mind. I agree with everybody who says it's one of the important, if not the most important, political relationships in the world. And being a businessman all my life, I've sort of always had the view that businessmen get along fine. It's the politicians that can mess things up. It is, in fact, I think, very important that the equation in Washington, D.C. Is very, very foreign to my Chinese friends. It's one of those difficult equations that's tough to explain in a country where political opinion is not a very important issue. But with that in mind, the venture capital entrepreneurial activities of both the United States and China are what I'd like to talk about for just a second. And I think this is the magic sauce in the equation that makes the U.S.-China relationship, I think, insured for the future. I get very impatient with politicians, with journalists, with scholars who say it's a zero-sum game. If it's a zero-sum game, the United States loses. 300 million against $1.3 billion doesn't work too well. So it's got to be a partnership. And the better China does, the better the relationship between the U.S. and China will be. And just like the success in the American economy that has arisen from new company creation, which is where new jobs come from, the Chinese leadership gets that same point. And I started Morgan Stanley's high-tech investment banking business, our venture capital business, and when I went to Asia in 1987, Susie, my wife, and I really didn't know quite what to expect. And by the way, our 3 children would say that she is a tough woman. Chinese or not. One of the things that I found as I looked around Asia was a sort of DNA in the entrepreneurial equation in China that reminded me of California. And as I've tested the government's thesis, what makes new company formation work? First, entrepreneurs. Second, risk capital. And third, an exit alternative. And one of the things that's very high on the list now, and I'm sure Myron will talk about it, is the discussions between the U.S. and China on a more liberal financial market in China. And because it's so important to have that equation work, the companies that Marguerite spoke about, have been created. We have a venture capital business, my son and I, in China, and we've invested in 40 companies, basically started 40 companies. And that equation works because the entrepreneurs understand value creation, equity ownership. They don't want to have control. They want to have a company that succeeds. But all of us understand the importance of an exit mechanism. So this equation is really key, and that's where I think conversations like this are so important. The symbiotic relationship between the venture capital industry in America and the venture capital industry in China is very key. And as we grow, they grow, and as more companies are created and successfully go public or get sold, the more wealth is created and the better the Chinese economy. So I am really an optimist about this equation, and I think the moment that the renminbi becomes convertible on capital account, which is not that far away, and cross-border capital flows, instead of just being episodic and approved one at a time, become the order of the day, that is the moment where the relationship between the U.S. and China will really flourish. I think it's a unique opportunity in history. We're very like-minded, and at the business level, There is a tremendous amount of cooperation, and I'm hugely optimistic. I want to just say one thing in closing. Confidence in San Francisco is key for Chinese investment here, but one of the things that Mayor Lee has done, which I really applaud, is he's made it easier to get things done in San Francisco. And one of the things that is so important when you talk to a Chinese investor is to understand the process of getting approval to get anything done. And it's just a lot better now than it was before Ed Lee became mayor. So thank you, Mayor Lee.
Thank you, Jack. Well, there's one perspective that hasn't been spoken to, and that's the perspective from Washington, D.C. with respect to U.S.-China trade. So when we thought about the speaker who was going to be 5th out of 5 outstanding speakers, we thought we need someone who's brilliant. So let me introduce Myron Brilliant.
Thank you for that introduction. Look, I'm batting cleanup here, and I want to say that a lot has been said, it just hasn't been said by me. So I'll give you my perspective, I think, on the U.S.-China relationship, but it will come from a Washington standpoint. I have been engaged in U.S.-China relations for over 25 years, since the early 1990s, where I helped co-chair the Business Coalition to advance the U.S.-China relationship. We've come a long way, but I can tell you in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square, they were not easy times to talk about what our relationship could look like in the future. And today, fast forward, there are still challenges ahead of us. So while I'm bullish, Jack, on the future of our relationship, I will sound more sober than the rest of the panelists. I have to tell you, though, it's an honor not only to be here with the Committee 100 and Dominique and Bob and everyone who's been involved in this organization. You deserve a lot of credit because this organization matters. And why does it matter? Because the Chinese American community is contributing in a lot of ways. In the education field, we've talked about the medical field, certainly in business, and increasingly in political affairs. I would like the voice to be louder. I'd like the Committee of 100's voice to be much louder, and I'd like the people in this room to take on that challenge. And I'll talk about how you can do that in my brief comments, but I think it's really critical for this community to speak out. I think the two mayors are important voices for the Chinese American community, but more important, they are important voices because they represent two cities that understand the importance of the Asia-Pacific region and understand the importance of the U.S.-China relationship. The Committee 100, valuable, critical organization, and I think it has an incredibly bright future. The state of California, a huge beneficiary of the relationship with China. No state has benefited more from the expansion of China's economy. No state gets more investment from China. In the last, from 2004, California got 30% of the foreign direct investment from China into the United States. Still pales comparison to what we should be getting in the state of California and around this country. Do you know that China's third largest export market is California? So the importance of the relationship is understood by the people in this room. The jobs that are created, the innovation partnerships, the opportunity in technology that's been discussed, the opportunity in the environmental field is enormous because innovation, the center of innovation in our country still resides in this area, in the Bay Area. And so the prospects for the future of the relationship for the state and for San Francisco and Oakland and the whole Bay Area is enormous. Now, the Chamber, I'm not going to go into all the details about what we do, but let me just say that our investment in this relationship is enormous by any measure. We have a very high-level Track 2 dialogue that exists between CEOs of each country and former government officials, including national security advisors, former heads of important parts of the government, including Charlene Barshevsky, the former ambassador, who helped negotiate China's entry into the WTO, and many others. We do this on an annual basis, actually twice a year. We're the only Track 2 dialogue. Kissinger, by the way, has the other one, but his is on security. We're the only Track 2 dialogue that has as its counterpart a former Vice Premier of China. In itself, quite a unique statement, and we have, of course, the blessing of the central government of China, and so we engage with the President and Premier on a regular basis. We believe also in the importance of promoting two-way investment. U.S. investment in China is longstanding. Jack is actually a person who has had spectacular success and probably some failures along the way, and it's been written about. But investment into China from the United States has been going on for a long time. China will invest $1 trillion over the next 5 to 10 years, outbound investment. We want a piece of that. The United States needs to talk more loudly about that. So we're doing more and more. In fact, we've done forums with Ambassador Locke and others to encourage Chinese companies to invest in manufacturing and retail and technology and in other areas. This is critical to the future of the relationship. It will create jobs in the United States. It will be healthy for our relationship. We're also big proponents of the subnational dialogues that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, and many others have encouraged. This is also a critical part. No one gets the relationship from a commercial standpoint better than the governors and mayors who are trying to reduce unemployment in their states. And certainly the business community respects the mayors and governors who have been engaged. And we want to encourage more of that, and we've been involved. In fact, so much that when I began to expand our work in the China field in the 1990s, one of the first things that I realized is get involved in the provinces in China, get to know the people at the provincial level. Today I sit as an advisor to the Guangdong government, to the governor. But I can tell you, by doing that, I got to know Xi Jinping. I got to know Vice Premier Wang Yang, who is in charge of the U.S.-China relationship. And encouraging that kind of engagement between our two countries is very critical. Grassroots programs around the country, like this and others, that we want to sponsor and encourage, is also a critical part. We need to talk more about the benefits of the relationship. We need to highlight the successes and recognize the challenges, but highlight the successes in our relationship. Neither government does a very good job in that regard. Neither government knows how to talk about success. We know how to point out to each other's flaws. We need to do a better job of projecting our successes in the relationship. And then, of course, we need to make sure that our dialogues between the two governments are results-oriented. It may shock you, it won't shock Jack, it won't shock Dominic. There are over 60 government-to-government dialogues that exist in our government. Let me tell you, they're not all results-oriented. They're process-oriented in many cases. We need to maximize the efficiency of our engagements. We have high-level dialogues like the strategic and economic dialogue that Secretary Kerry and others in government and the Secretary of Treasury engage in. But we need to strengthen our dialogues, and we need to make them more results-oriented. I will tell you that with China's rise, there are challenges. There are bumps in the road. The economy is growing. It creates more opportunities for American companies. But the integration of China into the world leadership structures has not been an easy one. China remains internally focused. They have huge problems in demographics and labor, in wage income distribution issues, huge environmental challenges. And so for the foreseeable future, China will continue to have to address these challenges, and it will preoccupy itself with the internal challenges and with regional issues. That said, more and more is being expected of China on the global stage. And yet there are differences between China's core national interests and the United States' core national interests. And we see that over Syria. We see that over Iran. We see that over North Korea. We see that in the cybersecurity space. We see that in other areas. And so what that means is that while China's role is evolving, and while the United States recognizes that China belongs in a unique relationship, and I can say something that the mayors cannot say, it is today the most important relationship. It's not one of the most important relationships. It is today the most important relationship because of the significance of China's rise and because no decisions on a global stage can take place without the United States consulting with China at the highest levels. So these are things we're going to have to manage through, and we're going to have a bumpy ride. It's like that airplane ride. But the airplane will land, and it will move forward. But we are going to continue to have to work at building a stronger, healthier relationship. Today, there are issues of distrust in the relationship, strategic distrust. And so it's very important that we think about how we can improve and strengthen the relationship. So let me give you 6 areas where I think we can make improvements in our relationship. And I'm going to be quite specific here. Time will not permit to go into detail. First, I think the two presidents, President Obama and President Xi Jinping, have worked hard, including in Sunnyvale, in building a relationship for the future. But the two presidents need to be more articulate about their vision. They need to speak to their two countries because there's a rise of economic and political nationalism. They need to speak forcefully about their vision. They need to articulate what the vision was. The last person who did that effectively was Bob Zoellick when he talked about the responsible stakeholder. Bob Zoellick was then Deputy Secretary of State. We need the president talking about this relationship in a way that the American people listen. 2, we need to streamline and upgrade the dialogues that exist. The strategic and economic dialogue was something that the Chamber was a proponent of. We're proponents of other dialogues like the JCCT, which is a commercial dialogue, and there are many others. But we need to make sure that these are results-oriented. And I won't go into how to do that, but there are lots of ways to do that. 3rd, we need to have more ambition, strategic ambition in our relationship. Jack referenced the bilateral investment treaty talks that are now underway between China and the United States, and they're going to pick up steam. But why not think about an economic partnership arrangement? Why not think about a free trade agreement? I'll tell you why. The political constraints on both sides. But we're doing this with Europe. We're doing this with 12 countries or 11 countries in the Trans-Pacific space. Why aren't we looking at this with the most important commercial relationship we have? And so the Chamber has commissioned a study that will come out soon on what it would mean for the United States and China on an FTA. And by the way, we are the reason that the transatlantic relationship between Europe and the United States has started. 2010, we started an advocacy campaign. So why shouldn't we begin to talk about an ambition of having a free trade agreement or an economic partnership? Politically challenging, but why shouldn't we begin to talk about it? 4th, we need to enhance ways to impress upon our leaders and our citizens the important way of two-way investment. That means listening to the Chinese about our regulatory process, the CITES process, but it's also talking to the Chinese about the restrictions that they have in their economy, the regulatory restrictions, and the great emphasis on state-owned enterprises and the challenges of competing with that. 5th, I think we need to look at how we strengthen the subnational dialogues. There are many of them, but we need to invest in them in very strategic and important ways and get more governors and mayors engaged and more provincial leaders in China engaged. And finally, I think what we're seeing in the Committee 100 and other groups in the cultural and educational exchanges, lots going on. Let's improve that. Let's take more efforts there. Let's extend it into other areas like healthcare. There is already some collaboration around research and development, but again, the issues of intellectual property and cybersecurity and issues like that impede progress. Those are 6 areas, which I could elaborate on at another time, where we think we can make progress in this relationship. I'm going to end with just a couple things. It's very easy for political leaders in both countries to talk about the vastly different economic and political systems, the different income levels, the fact that China's not yet ready to share the stage with the United States on global issues, although that's changing. But that's a cop-out. It's a cop-out on both sides. The United States and China are ready to engage. The political leadership is making strides. It just needs to have more courage at times. And that requires a conversation with the American people. That's why organizations like the Committee 100 are critical. It's why the Chamber and other voices are also critical. I can tell you that when we're talking about the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, and other groups, it's impossible to envision a future where the United States and China are not only coordinating and not only collaborating, but really, frankly, sharing a mutual vision. We have to reconcile differences. We have to overcome the distrust in the relationship. But we have an enormous bright future, and our mutual prosperity depends on us working closer together. And not just our bilateral relationship. The global economy depends on our expanding our economic ties and our political and security ties. We can build, I think, a 21st century relationship. We're in the process of doing that. We're going to have bumps in the road, but I am confident that if people in this room and people around this country fully appreciate the breadth of the relationship, fully understand the stakes, that their voices will be heard. And so when I hear the two mayors talk, I'm encouraged, inspired, but I want to make sure that we don't just rely on a few good voices, that we find a way to expand those voices nationally, because our future depends on it. And with that sobering but hopefully pragmatic view of the state of the U.S.-China relationship, I leave you with one just thought. We have, in less than 15 years, taken an insignificant commercial relationship to our second largest commercial relationship. Within 5 to 10 years, the U.S.-China relationship will surpass the U.S.-Canadian relationship. So that means a lot of jobs, a lot of prosperity is tied to this relationship. But not many Americans know that. Not many Americans recognize it. And not many Americans are willing to stand up and speak out in favor of the relationship at times when it's needed. And we can always have disputes, but it's a question of how you handle disputes and challenges in the relationship and how you build on the successes that will depend on how quickly we get to what I consider the 21st century relationship.
Thank you, Myron. Thank you to all of our speakers. We now have an opportunity to have about 20-25 minutes of question and answer. And we have a choice. We can make this one of the most interesting, stimulating parts of the evening, or we can make this very boring. I personally would choose the former. Towards that end, I'd like to ask the people who have questions to raise their hands, and we have floating mics. If you could be succinct in the questions that you ask. Come in, go out, and state your affiliation, your name and affiliation when you ask the question. To our panelists, I'd ask you also to be succinct. I don't think we need 5 answers to every question out there, so I'll look for margin in terms of the speakers where you really have something you want to add there, because I know everybody has something to say about all the questions I'm sure that are going to be posed. But let's not go 5 answers for every question. And with that, let's start. So the first question is right here.
Is there a mic? Oh.
Yeah, there's a mic right here. Just state your name, your affiliation, and let's go.
I'm Stanley Quan, University of San Francisco professor. I have one simple question. I think that Myron or the mayors can answer this. One of my fortunate jobs is that I'm in charge of about 900 Chinese students from China. I got to meet their parents a lot when I travel to China. And one of the most interesting situations is when I go to China, I always meet with all the United States government agencies, or also the Chamber of Commerce, or also any of the trade commission. I know that we've done a really good job in trying to publicize the investment of Chinese in this country. But when I talk to the parents of the students who are either high government officials or wealthy business people, the first thing they always say, it's difficult, it's so difficult to invest in the US, I don't even want to try. I want to find out what can we do about it. I know we've been having all of those organizations, but maybe it's marketing of the Americans' situation like Myron or what the mayors have been talking about.
I'm going to defer to the mayors first because they outrank me.
Okay.
Well, even San Francisco have this very advanced outpost strategy. What I found is that when I was elected, the first congratulations came from China because the results were released around 7 o'clock at night, and it was like noontime in Hong Kong and Shanghai and Beijing where all my friends were working. So they pay a lot of attention to America, but when they come, they think that the mayors control everything the way they do in Guangdong. So one of the things I've learned is to not even show them long-range things, but to show them and introduce them to people who have ready-to-go projects. So they don't have to worry about the permissions, the zoning, whatever. And I've been trying to do sort of more like a matchmaking, right? It's like, you want to invest this amount of money, these are your options. You want to be in transit, you want to be in real estate, you want to be in retail. And we've worked hard to package deals and to do a little bit more research and matchmaking. Some of the very big companies are looking for long-term investments, and we will introduce them to people like, so for instance, in my city, that would be Coliseum City will probably be a decade-long project. We'll start with some football and retail and hotels, but it will eventually be office buildings and housing much bigger. There are only some Chinese companies that are sophisticated and independent enough to be able to make a multiple-year commitment. It's more the bigger challenge is, I've got $1 billion to spend, what do you have? Right, so you literally have to say, okay, $1 billion investment, this is what you could look at, and we do, like I said, a lot of matchmaking. Make it easy for them, as apparently my friend Ed does.
Just very shortly, I mean, that's exactly the reason why we got China SF. I mean, opening up offices in Beijing and Shanghai, eventually Guangzhou, allows our staff to have an ongoing exchange of information. Jean and I know we have been taken out to so many dinners and lunches with groups that come, and sometimes I can't tell one group from the other, except to practice my Mandarin. But I inevitably get into a discussion of...
You're not going to say we all look the same, right?
No. But they have very basic questions that you suggest. You know, what is it that your city is doing, and what can we get into that is a good return, safe? Obviously, we always talk about real estate, but we also talk about everything from restaurants to condominium housing, waterfront development, and they don't understand how we do it because it is complicated. That's why Jack was paying me a little compliment. We've tried to make it a little easier to understand, and it's so important that they meet my planning director, my port director, my airport director, so they know who to get them a little better educated about process. One of the things they hate is to make an investment and have it sit there for years and not understand why isn't anything moving. And we've had all those examples in our city, and it's upsetting to me as well. When you make an investment, things should move along in a very deliberate, expected, smooth way, and that's what we're trying to do in our cities. And that goes not just for Chinese investment, it goes for U.S. investments as well.
Anybody want anything?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of points, and then maybe Jack will lift his finger up. First of all, I'm surprised that Mayor Quan has not referenced the Oakland A's having such a successful season over the San Francisco Giants. But
We're being nice today.
let me just say a couple of things that one is.
But I have to say, I'm looking for a Chinese investor when we build a new waterfront stadium.
One is something I did not reference in my quick comments, which is we need to make it easier for the Chinese to travel to our country. And it's getting better. The processing out of the U.S. Embassy in China has improved, and I give Ambassador Locke our incredible kudos for doing that. He's made it a big point so that Chinese business leaders don't have to spend a lot of time on lines anymore. And that, you would be surprised at how much of an irritant that is for Chinese business leaders. The second part is we need to move to 5-year visa exchanges. I mean, we're still looking at 1-2-year exchanges, and that, again, impedes the progress in the commercial relationship, frankly, in cultural and other ways. We need to also look at our own visa laws in the context of the broader immigration debate, which the Chamber supports and was working closely with labor on. The second point is that the Chinese are often confused by our processes because they don't do the due diligence. And when the U.S. companies went into China, they lost sometimes. They made mistakes, but they learned from those mistakes and they invested in due diligence. The Chinese still are hesitant to use lawyers, consultants, advisors in the United States. It's changing, but we wouldn't go to China without that support mechanism. The Chinese need to do that here. That's improving. And then finally, since I'm getting a stop sign, I feel like, well, I won't tell you about that. I will say, even though there are other areas to cover, I would say simply, there is, again, I think, a problem in how the Chinese talk about success in the U.S. and other markets. There's still too much focus on the high-level CFIUS issues that come up. The Smithfield example, if it doesn't go through, is going to get a lot of play. The CNOOC and other kinds of examples. And that creates, I think, a negative perception with high-wealth Chinese. Now, they don't have to worry about that when they're investing in retail and restaurants and things like that. But there is this lingering thought that, gee, every time I want to make an investment in the United States of some significant value, I'm going to have to go through the federal government and I'm going to have to go through a CFIUS national security review. Not the case, but that is a perception that we're still fighting. So we're actually doing a lot of work in explaining that in China, working with the Commerce Department, working with other organizations, working with Chinese organizations. But we're still having to address that every time we're in a public forum in China.
Okay, next question back there.
Hello everyone, my name
Your name and affiliation?
Hello everyone, my name is Stanley. I'm from Berkeley, and thank you for coming to Washington to put out this great forum. I have a question with with Chinese companies to invest in the States. I know lots of Chinese companies have been investing in the States, especially in the Bay Area, but they have there has been difficulties to enter the real U.S. markets. So my question is, at the current U.S. international trade policy, how likely will the Chinese companies pass the 5-year sunset review? Thank you.
Well, it gives me a chance to plug the Asia Society, of which I'm proud to be the vice chairman. This organization retained the Rhodium Group and has done 2 studies. One, Chinese foreign direct investment into the United States, in depth, deal by deal. And one of the things that this study shows is that bad cases make bad law. Most people think of CNOOC and Chevron fighting. They think of Huawei getting turned down. In fact, there have been, Myron said, 30% of the deals have been done in California, and most of them have gone through very smoothly. So we did a subsequent study using the same group on Chinese foreign direct investment into California. And we've taken this to China. And I mean, it's very clear that if you do your homework and you understand what the issues are, that it's not that hard to make investments in the United States. And I think looking forward, this study makes it very clear in very thoughtful ways that, as Myron says, that it looks to us like there's $1 trillion worth of foreign direct investment coming out of China, and a lot of it will come into the United States. So if it's done thoughtfully, it can be done. And these studies show, for people who are thoughtful, that it's not that difficult.
Can I just, 2 points, because I know the second part of your question was, Jack hit all the key points. I just would say that the group he referenced is a group we've actually used. We're going to release a report on infrastructure opportunities in the United States for Chinese companies, in both Chinese and English. And it will come out in the next few months, and it will be a very public document, and it will help the Chinese at least understand infrastructure opportunities in our country. But on the trade rules side, of course, the Chinese continue in every possible dialogue to say that the U.S. trade laws create, whether it's an export control area or whether it's anti-dumping or other areas, created a negative incentive for the relationship. That's BS. The reality is that we need to improve our export control laws, but it represents such a small percentage of our overall trade and investment opportunities, and we must not get colored by that. This is, again, my point that we need to look at the big picture and not get stuck on those small irritants.
Okay. Let's go to the next question in the corner there. I think, she has the microphone just right behind you. Excuse me. Go ahead, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Alice, and I'm from Teach for China. I noticed today there's a lot of young people here, and I know we look up to you in what you have achieved in your careers and your lives. My question to the panel is, how do you look at the role of education and the role of young people today in building stronger US-China relationships as well as business partnerships? Thank you.
Marguerite, can you take that off as a lead off?
Sure. I think the next generation is the key for what the relationship will be. And education, in terms of changing people's perceptions, attitudes, skills, is critical. And I'm familiar with your organization. I think having individuals who spend intensive time in both people from the United States who go to China as well as Chinese students who come and spend time here is a first step in educating people in an immersive experience. In terms of what that will do for the next generation, the power in youth is something that's unbridled, and obviously university that I'm part of and all the educators here in the room are dedicated to teaching skills as well as giving experiences. So I applaud what you're doing. I think that's a critical part and something that actually hasn't been, I think, explored enough for collaborative bilateral programs.
The next question right in front of you.
I'm a professor of international business at the University of San Francisco, and I want to thank each one of you panelists for your wonderful insights. I have a question and a comment. I think there's general agreement that China-US relationship is the most important, but there are so many barriers and so many threats and challenges out there, moving this relationship forward. And reflecting back the Japanese experience, 1970 and 80, investing in U.S. and how they overcame the Japan threat. And I think I have some reflection on that. I think one of the things they did right and was the fact that they established so many civil organizations in non-profit and non-government organizations, helping, educating the public, both in U.S. and in Japan. So I think gradually, that kind of threat was, going away. But I reflect back, here, what's going on now with Chinese companies investing in U.S. in particular. I think there hasn't really not been enough done in this area. And how can you point to any good civil organizations in helping to forge this kind of relationship? And fortunately, University of San Francisco actually has recently established China Business Studies Group, which is equivalent to center, and I am fortunate to be the executive director of the center, and my wonderful colleague, Professor Stanley Quan, is the executive board member. And so we have actually been doing a lot of work in this area, and we just finished a white paper in partnership with China General Chamber of Commerce, your counterpart.
Your question is? My
question is, I would say, what could we do better in this area, and apart from what we've done? And what we've done is very little, and really I want to make friends with many people here, and would like you to support us. But I think there needs to be more effort in this area. That's what could you say about this?
I'd like to take it just a slightly different level. When we were invited to the White House, I sat next to the ranking Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He had not been to China in 9 years, and I sort of looked at him, I said, I go to China almost every year, and it's a different country every year I go. And I was going to make it my personal mission to get some business to take him to China.
You can't do that anymore.
The
laws have changed.
You can be creative, but unfortunately he was too moderate for the Republicans, and he got elected out of office. But it is scary that the national leadership of the Republican Party in charge of foreign policy had not been to China in nearly a decade. And, you know, all of us know, I go to Shenzhen, I go to the cities in London. There are whole new cities every year, right? And you can't even understand what's happening in China. So the building of people-to-people relationships, whether it's over the student exchanges, et cetera, are critical. I know that Japan did a very good job in sending its whole leadership to America to sort of be quote-unquote trained. The economy is doing it in China, but do we do it equally the other way? I don't think so. I think more and more Americans are going to China to study and to work, but it's very unequal yet, and we're the losers because we don't understand one of the most powerful forces in the world today because we don't travel and we don't interact on a people-to-people level.
I want to say something about the Japan piece because I think it's important. It's fundamentally different.
And then we'll go to one last question.
I hear all the time that we should learn that the relationship should learn from the Japan example. It's not a good example on many levels. First of all, Japan had a political and security relationship with the United States, which is fundamentally very different than where China and the United States is today, unfortunately. Two, Japan did not always invest strategically in this country. And China's first investments in this country have been largely in the energy field and some other areas, but the major investments have been in energy. China has been much more strategic, and I think to their credit, although politicians don't always say that, to their credit, much more strategic about their outbound investments around the world. And so that has put it under scrutiny in the United States, unfortunately, but it is a case that China is looking to fuel its economy, its growth in its economy, and investing in Australia, in South America, and in the United States to buy raw materials, to buy energy resources. That's diversifying, and that's important for the future of our relationship, but it is why those particular kinds of investments have gotten a lot of scrutiny here in the United States, more scrutiny sometimes than they should, as Jack and I both would agree, but it is fundamentally a different relationship and it creates more challenges, but again, the breadth of this relationship over time is going to be incredible, and we just got to keep working on it.
Okay, one last question, and I know that I would like the lead-off answerer to be Mayor Lee.
Great, hi. My name is Holly Chiang, and I run an organization called the Golden Bridges Foundation. We have a program called the Golden Bridges Foundation. We have a program called Project Pangyang, and we are building a network of young Americans who have lived and studied in China in support of President Obama's 100,000 Strong initiative. So my question is, I deal with a lot of young people, I deal with a lot of exchange programs, and I feel that they're not really supported once they come out of these programs. The greatest outcome of all of these study abroad programs are its people. And the issues of visas, the issues of getting a job, using their language skills, using their skills. I find a lot of pressure on myself. But I guess specifically, what are we doing at a governmental level to promote and support young people that are coming out of this space that have all of these new skills, very important skills, and how can we continue to engage them and grow their strength so that they can contribute more effectively to the U.S.-China relationship?
Well, I'd say you have a good criticism. I know that I've had a number of presentations to leaders at the local colleges here in San Francisco, USF and SF State and others, where they do have China programs, but we need to connect them to what we're doing in the real business sense. And so I think, for example, there's great opportunities. We have 26 Chinese-owned companies now in San Francisco. 8 of them are in the solar area. And they made their headquarters. They decided to make their North American headquarters in San Francisco. A lot of people don't know what they're doing and how to assist them and how to be a part of them, because we're getting into, and this is where China SF is, we're getting into that realm where they could start their headquarters and companies here, but they don't know how to penetrate the markets in North America. They don't know how to do that. There's this cross-culture challenge for them. And this is where I think the youth can be a great part of that. People who are interested in building that relationship can do so, and I don't think as governments, we're tapping that very well. So I think it's a good criticism. I'll take that up as part of our China SF program to kind of engage in our youth and bring the people who've gone through the Roots programs and all the others to get them aboard to help these companies manage their affairs here. I think that's a great idea.
Okay. You have one last comment?
There's a woman in the audience named Leah Fine who represents Teach for China. And one of my suggestions would be that you network with other organizations that are trying to do exactly the same thing. Teach for China has 300 kids in Yunnan province that are teaching with counterparts right now. Leah, raise your hand and talk to your friend over there. Thank you.
We know each other.
So just continue to conspire together.
On behalf of the Committee of 100, I'd like to thank this great audience for your interest in this subject, and I'd like to thank this all-star panel for your time and your thought leadership in this very important subject. Thank you very much.
And once again, I would like to thank the panel, but especially the very extraordinary, well done and adept moderation by our former chairman, Bobby. Please give him a hand. At this time, I'd like to remind you that we will be collecting these evaluations from you, as well as the recyclable name badge that you have. And let me introduce to you the Vice Chairman of Committee 100 here in the North California region, Jay Xu, whose daytime job is the President of the Asian Art Museum. He will be presenting closing remarks for tonight. Thank you.
Wow, what a rich and thought-provoking panel that we have. I think you don't get to spend this kind of evening very often, so certainly for me. So just on behalf of the members of C100 in Northern California, I'd like to say a few words of thanks. We extend our gratitude to our experts who joined us today and to the 10 supporting organizations representing the Bay Area's diversity who helped to make this inaugural forum a success. So we're exceedingly privileged, honored, and pleased to be able to host the first Speakers Forum of C100. We also appreciate the leadership of C100 Chairman Dominic, and express our thanks to our hardworking volunteers and the staff led by Executive Director Angie Tang. Lastly, we would like to thank everyone for attending the inaugural Committee of 100 Speakers Bureau. We look forward to seeing you all next year at C100 annual meeting, which will take place none other than San Francisco. So very important dates to keep, April 25th to 26th at the San Francisco's Four Seasons Hotel. So thank you, and have a good evening, and see you next year. Thank you.